Disc 3.
To a romantic, this classic mode often appears dull, awkward, and ugly, like mechanical maintenance itself. Everything is in terms of pieces and parts and components and relationships. Nothing is figured out until it is run through the computer a dozen times. Everything's got to be measured and proved. Oppressive, heavy, endlessly gray, the death force. Within the classic mode, however, the romantic has some appearances of his own. Frivolous, irrational, erratic, untrustworthy, interested primarily in pleasure-seeking, shallow, of no substance, often a parasite who cannot or will not carry his own weight. A real drag on society. By now, these battle lines should sound a little familiar. This is the source of the trouble. Persons tend to think and feel exclusively in one mode or the other, and in doing so to misunderstand and underestimate what the other mode is all about. But no one is willing to give up the truth as he sees it, and as far as I know, no one now living has any real reconciliation of these truths or modes. There is no point at which these visions of reality are unified. And so, in recent times, we have seen a huge split develop between a classic culture and a romantic counterculture. Two worlds, growingly alienated and hateful toward each other, with everyone wondering if it will always be this way. A house divided against itself. No one wants it, really, despite what his antagonists in the other dimension might think. It is within this context that what Phaedrus thought and said is significant. But no one was listening at that time, and they only thought him eccentric at first, then undesirable, then slightly mad, and then genuinely insane. There seems little doubt that he was insane, but much of his writing at the time indicates that what was driving him insane was this hostile opinion of him. Unusual behavior tends to produce estrangement in others, which tends to further the unusual behavior, and thus the estrangement, in self-stroking cycles until some sort of climax is reached. In Phaedrus's case, there was a court-ordered police arrest and permanent removal from society. I see we are at the left turn onto US 12, and John has pulled up for gas. I pull up beside him. The thermometer by the door of the station reads 92 degrees. Going to be another rough one today, I say. When the tanks are filled, we head across the street into a restaurant for coffee. Chris, of course, is hungry. I tell him I've been waiting for that. I tell him he eats with the rest of us or not at all. Not angrily, just matter-of-factly. He's reproachful, but sees how it's going to be. I catch a fleeting look of relief from Sylvia. Evidently, she thought this was going to be a continuous problem. When we have finished the coffee and are outside again, the heat is so ferocious, we move off on the cycles as fast as possible. Again, there is that momentary coolness, but it disappears. The sun makes the burned grass and sand so bright I have to squint to cut down glare. This US 12 is an old, bad highway. The broken concrete is tar-patched and bumpy. Road signs indicate detours ahead. On either side of the road are occasional worn sheds and shacks and roadside stands that have accumulated through the years. The traffic is heavy now. I'm just as happy to be thinking about the rational, analytical, classical world of Phaedrus. His kind of rationality has been used since antiquity to remove oneself from the tedium and depression of one's immediate surroundings. What makes it hard to see is that where once it was used to get away from it all, the escape has been so successful that now it is the it-all that the romantics are trying to escape. What makes his world so hard to see clearly is not its strangeness, but its usualness. Familiarity can blind you too. His way of looking at things produces a kind of description that can be called an analytic description. That is another name of the classic platform from which one discusses things in terms of their underlying form. He was a totally classic person, And to give a fuller description of what this is, I want now to turn his analytic approach back upon itself, to analyze analysis itself. I want to do this, first of all, by giving an extensive example of it, and then by dissecting what it is. The motorcycle is a perfect subject for it, since the motorcycle itself was invented by classic minds. So listen. A motorcycle may be divided for purposes of classical rational analysis by means of its component assemblies and by means of its functions. If divided by means of its component assemblies, its most basic division is into a power assembly and a running assembly. The power assembly may be divided into the engine and the power delivery system. The engines will be taken up first. The engine consists of a housing containing a power train, a fuel-air system, an ignition system, a feedback system, and a lubrication system. The powertrain consists of cylinders, pistons, connecting rods, a crankshaft, and a flywheel. The fuel-air system components, which are part of the engine, consist of a gas tank and filter, an air cleaner, a carburetor, valves, and exhaust pipes. The ignition system consists of an alternator, a rectifier, a battery, a high-voltage coil, and spark plugs. The feedback system consists of a cam chain, a camshaft, tappets, and a distributor. The lubrication system consists of an oil pump and channels throughout the housing for distribution of the oil. The power delivery system accompanying the engine consists of a clutch, a transmission, and a chain. The supporting assembly accompanying the power assembly consists of a frame, including foot pegs, seat and fenders, a steering assembly, front and rear shock absorbers, wheels, control levers and cables, lights and horn, and speed and mileage indicators. That's a motorcycle divided according to its components. To know what the components are for, a division according to functions is necessary. A motorcycle may be divided into normal running functions and special operator-controlled functions. Normal running functions may be divided into functions during the intake cycle, functions during the compression cycle, functions during the power cycle, and functions during the exhaust cycle, and so on. I could go on about which functions occur in their proper sequence during each of the 4 cycles, then go on to the operator-controlled functions, and that would be a very summary description of the underlying form of a motorcycle. It would be extremely short and rudimentary, as descriptions of this sort go. Almost any one of the components mentioned can be expanded on indefinitely. I've read an entire engineering volume on contact points alone, which are just a small but vital part of the distributor. There are other types of engines than the single-cylinder auto engine described here: 2-cycle engines, multi-cylinder engines, diesel engines, Wankel engines, but this example is enough. This description would cover the what of the motorcycle in terms of components and the how of the engine in terms of functions. It would badly need a where analysis in the form of an illustration, and also a why analysis in the form of engineering principles that led to this particular conformation of parts. But the purpose here isn't exhaustively to analyze the motorcycle. It's to provide a starting point, an example of a mode of understanding of things which will itself become an object of analysis. There's certainly nothing strange about this description at first hearing. It sounds like something from a beginning textbook on the subject, or perhaps a first lesson in a vocational course. What is unusual about it is seen when it ceases to be a mode of discourse and becomes an object of discourse. Then certain things can be pointed to. The first thing to be observed about this description is so obvious you have to hold it down, or it will drown out every other observation. This is, it is just duller than ditch water. Yada, 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 ya, carburetor, gear ratio compression, yada, ya, piston, plugs, intake, yada, ya, on and on and on. That is the romantic face of the classical mode. Dull, awkward, and ugly. Few romantics get beyond that point. But if you can hold down that most obvious observation, some other things can be noticed that do not at first appear. The first is that the motorcycle, so described, is almost impossible to understand unless you already know how one works. The immediate surface impressions that are essential for primary understanding are gone. Only the underlying form is left. The second is that the observer is missing. The description doesn't say that to see the piston you must remove the cylinder head. You aren't anywhere in the picture. Even the operator is a kind of personality-less robot whose performance of a function on the machine is completely mechanical. There are no real subjects in this description. Only objects exist that are independent of any observer. The third is that the words good and bad and all their synonyms are completely absent. No value judgments have been expressed anywhere, only facts. The fourth is that there is a knife moving here, a very deadly one, an intellectual scalpel so swift and so sharp you sometimes don't see it moving. You get the illusion that all those parts are just there and are being named as they exist. But they can be named quite differently and organized quite differently depending on how the knife moves. For example, the feedback mechanism, which includes the camshaft and cam chain and tappets and distributor, exists only because of an unusual cut of this analytical knife. If you were to go to a motorcycle parts department and ask them for a feedback assembly, they wouldn't know what the hell you were talking about. They don't split it up that way. No two manufacturers ever split it up quite the same way, and every mechanic is familiar with the problem of the part you can't buy because you can't find it because the manufacturer considers it a part of something else. It is important to see this knife for what it is and not to be fooled into thinking that motorcycles or anything else are the way they are just because the knife happened to cut it up that way. It is important to concentrate on the knife itself. Later, I will want to show how an ability to use this knife creatively and effectively can result in solutions to the classic and romantic split. Phaedrus was a master with this knife and used it with dexterity and a sense of power. With a single stroke of analytical thought, he split the whole world into parts of his own choosing. Split the parts and split the fragments of the parts, finer and finer and finer, until he had reduced it to what he wanted it to be. Even the special use of the terms classic and romantic are examples of his knifemanship. But if this were all there were to him, analytic skill, I would be more than willing to shut up about him. What makes it important not to shut up about him was that he used this skill in such a bizarre and yet meaningful way. No one ever saw this. I don't think he even saw it himself. And it may be an illusion of my own, but the knife he used was less that of an assassin than that of a poor surgeon. Perhaps there is no difference, but he saw a sick and ailing thing happening, and he started cutting deep, deeper and deeper to get at the root of it. He was after something. That is important. He was after something, and he used the knife because that was the only tool he had. But he took on so much and went so far, in the end his real victim was himself. Chapter 7. Heat is everywhere now. I can't ignore it anymore. The air is like a furnace blast so hot that my eyes under the goggles feel cool compared to the rest of my face. My hands are cool, but the gloves have big black spots from perspiration on the back, surrounded by white streaks of dried salt. On the road ahead, a crow tugs on some carrion and flies up slowly as we approach. It looks like a lizard on the road, dry and stuck to the tar. On the horizon appears an image of buildings shimmering slightly. I look down at the map and figure it must be Bowman. I think about ice water and air conditioning. On the street and sidewalks of Bowman, we see almost no one, even though plenty of parked cars show they're here. All inside. We swing the machines into an angled parking place with a tight turn that points them outward for when we're ready to go. A lone elderly person wearing a broad-brimmed hat watches us put the cycles on their stands and remove helmets and goggles. "Hot enough for you?" he asks. His expression is blank. John shakes his head and says, "God." The expression, shaded by the hat, becomes almost a smile. "What is the temperature?" John asks. 102, he says. "Last I saw. Should go to 104. He asks how far we have come, and we tell him, and he nods with a kind of approval. "That's a long way," he says. Then he asks about the machines. The beer and air conditioning are calling, but we don't break away. We just stand there in the 102 sun, talking to this person. He is a stockman, retired, says this is pretty much ranch country around here, and he used to own a Henderson cycle years ago. It pleases me that he should want to talk about his Henderson in this 102 sun. We talk about it for a while, with growing impatience from John and Sylvia and Chris, and when we finally say goodbye, he says he is glad to have met us, and his expression is still blank, but we sense that he really meant it. He walks away with a kind of slow dignity in the 102 sun. In the restaurant, I try to comment on this, but no one is interested. John and Sylvia look really out of it. They just sit and soak up the air-conditioned air without a move. The waitress comes for the order, and that snaps them out of it a little. But they are not ready, and so she goes away again. "I don't think I want to leave here," Sylvia says. An image of the elderly man outside in the wide-brimmed hat comes back to me. "Think what it was like around here before air conditioning," I say. "I am," she says. "With the roads this hot and that bad back tire of mine, we shouldn't go more than 60, I say. No comment from them. Chris, in contrast to them, seems to be back to his normal self, alert and watching everything. When the food comes, he wolfs it down and then, before we are half finished, asks for more. He gets it, and we wait for him to finish. Miles later, and the heat is just ferocious. Sunglasses and goggles are not enough for this glare. You need a welder's mask. The high plains break up into washed-out and gullied hills. It is all bright whitish tan, not a blade of grass anywhere, just scattered weed stalks and rocks and sand. The black of the highway is a relief to look at, so I stare down at it and study how the blur whizzes by underfoot. Beside it I see the left exhaust pipe has picked up a bluer color than it has ever had before. I spit on my glove tips, touch it, and can see the sizzle. Not good. It's important now to just live with this and not fight it mentally. Mind control. I should talk now about Phaedrus's knife. It'll help understand some of the things we talked about. The application of this knife, the division of the world into parts, and the building of this structure is something everybody does. All the time we are aware of millions of things around us. These changing shapes, these burning hills, the sound of the engine, the feel of the throttle, each rock and weed and fence post and piece of debris beside the road. Aware of these things, but not really conscious of them unless there is something unusual or unless they reflect something we are predisposed to see. We could not possibly be conscious of these things and remember all of them because our mind would be so full of useless details, we would be unable to think. From all this awareness, we must select, and what we select and call consciousness is never the same as the awareness because the process of selection mutates it. We take a handful of sand from the endless landscape of awareness around us and call that handful of sand the world. Once we have the handful of sand, the world of which we are conscious, a process of discrimination goes to work on it. This is the knife. We divide the sand into parts, this and that, here and there, black and white, now and then. The discrimination is the division of the conscious universe into parts. The handful of sand looks uniform at first, but the longer we look at it, the more diverse we find it to be. Each grain of sand is different. No two are alike. Some are similar in one way, some are similar in another way, and we can form the sand into separate piles on the basis of this similarity and dissimilarity. Shades of color in different piles, sizes in different piles, grain shapes in different piles, subtypes of grain shapes in different piles, grades of opacity in different piles, and so on and on and on. You'd think the process of subdivision and classification would come to an end somewhere, but it doesn't. It just goes on and on. Classical understanding is concerned with the piles and the basis for sorting and interrelating them. Romantic understanding is directed toward the handful of sand before the sorting begins. Both are valid ways of looking at the world, although irreconcilable with each other. What has become an urgent necessity is a way of looking at the world that does violence to neither of these two kinds of understanding and unites them into one. Such an understanding will not reject sand sorting or contemplation of unsorted sand for its own sake. Such an understanding will instead seek to direct attention to the endless landscape from which the sand is taken. That is what Phaedrus, the poor surgeon, was trying to do. To understand what he was trying to do, it's necessary to see that part of the landscape, inseparable from it, which must be understood, is a figure in the middle of it, sorting sand into piles. To see the landscape without seeing this figure is not to see the landscape at all. To reject that part of the Buddha that attends to the analysis of motorcycles is to miss the Buddha entirely. There is a perennial classical question that asks which part of the motorcycle, which grain of sand in which pile, is the Buddha. Obviously, to ask that question is to look in the wrong direction, for the Buddha is everywhere. But just as obviously to ask that question is to look in the right direction, for the Buddha is everywhere. About the Buddha that exists independently of any analytic thought, much has been said. Some would say too much, and would question any attempt to add to it. But about the Buddha that exists within analytic thought and gives that analytic thought its direction, virtually nothing has been said. And there are historic reasons for this. But history keeps happening, and it seems no harm, and maybe some positive good, to add to our historical heritage with some talk in this area of discourse. When analytic thought, the knife, is applied to experience, something is always killed in the process. That is fairly well understood, at least in the arts. Mark Twain's experience comes to mind, in which, after he had mastered the analytic knowledge needed to pilot the Mississippi River, he discovered the river had lost its beauty. Something is always killed. But what is less noticed in the arts, something is always created, too. And instead of just dwelling on what is killed, it's important also to see what's created and to see the process as a kind of death-birth continuity that is neither good nor bad, but just is. We pass through a town called Marmouth, but John doesn't stop even for a rest, and so we go on. More furnace heat, into some badlands, and we cross the border into Montana. A sign by the road announces it. Sylvia waves her arms up and down, and I beep the horn in response, but when I look at the sign, my feelings are not jubilant at all. For me, its information causes a sudden inward tension that can't exist for them. They've no way of knowing we're now in the country where he lived. All this talk so far about classic and romantic understanding must seem a strangely oblique way of describing him. But to get at Phaedrus, this oblique route is the only one to take. To describe his physical appearance or the statistics of his life would be to dwell on misleading superficialities. And to come at him directly would be to invite disaster. He was insane. And when you look directly at an insane man, all you see is a reflection of your own knowledge that he's insane, which is not to see him at all. To see him, you must see what he saw, and when you are trying to see the vision of an insane man, an oblique route is the only way to come at it. Otherwise, your own opinions block the way. There is only one access to him that I can see as passable, and we still have a way to go. I've been going into all this business of analyses and definitions and hierarchies, not for their own sake, but to lay the groundwork for an understanding of the direction in which Phaedrus went. I told Chris the other night that Phaedrus spent his entire life pursuing a ghost. That was true. The ghost he pursued was the ghost that underlies all of technology, all of modern science, all of Western thought. It was the ghost of rationality itself. I told Chris that he found the ghost, and that when he found it, he thrashed it good. I think in a figurative sense, that is true. The things I hope to bring to light as we go along are some of the things he uncovered. Now the times are such that others may at last find them of value. No one then would see the ghost that Phaedrus pursued, but I think now that more and more people see it, or get glimpses of it in bad moments. A ghost which calls itself rationality, but whose appearance is that of incoherence and meaninglessness, which causes the most normal of everyday acts to seem slightly mad because of their irrelevance to anything else. This is the ghost of normal everyday assumptions, which declares that the ultimate purpose of life, which is to keep alive, is impossible, but that this is the ultimate purpose of life anyway, so that great minds struggle to cure diseases so that people may live longer, but only madmen ask why. One lives longer in order that he may live longer. There is no other purpose. That is what the ghost says. At Baker, where we stopped, the thermometers are reading 108 degrees in the shade. When I take my gloves off, the metal of the gas tank is so hot I can't touch it. The engine is making ominous nick-nicking sounds from overheating. Very bad. The rear tire has worn badly too, and I feel with my hand that it's almost as hot as the gas tank. We're going to have to slow down, I say. What? I don't think we should go over 50, I say. John looks at Sylvia, and she looks at him. Something has already been said between them about my slowness. They both look as if they've about had it. We just want to get there fast, John says, and they both walk toward a restaurant. The chain has been running hot and dry, too. In the right-hand saddlebag, I rummage for a can of spray lubricant, find it, then start the engine and spray the moving chain. The chain is still so hot the solvent evaporates almost instantly. Then I squirt a little oil on, let it run for a minute, and shut the engine off. Chris waits patiently, then follows me into the restaurant. I thought you said the big slump was going to come on the second day, Sylvia says as we approach the booth they are in. Second or third, I reply. Or fourth or fifth? Maybe. She and John look at each other again with the same expression they showed before. It seems to say three's a crowd. They want to go ahead fast and wait for me in some town up ahead. I'd suggest it myself, except that if they go much faster, they won't be waiting for me in some town. It'll be the side of the road. I don't know how the people here stand this, Sylvia says. Well, it's hard country, I say, with a little irritation. They know it's hard before they come here, and are ready for it. I add, if one person complains, he just makes it that much harder for the others. They've got stamina. They know how to keep on going. John and Sylvia don't say much, and John finishes his Coke early and is off to a bar for a snort. I go out and check the cycle luggage again and find that the new pack has been compressing a little, and so take up the slack in the ropes and retie them. Chris points to a thermometer in direct sunlight, and we see it has gone all the way above the scale at 120 degrees. Before we are out of town, I'm sweating again. The cool drying-off period doesn't last even half a minute. The heat just slams into us. Even with dark sunglasses, I have to squint my eyes into slits. There's nothing but burning sand and pale sky so bright it's hard to look anywhere. It's just become white-hot everywhere, a real inferno. John up ahead is speeding faster and faster. I give up on him and slow it down to 55. Unless you're just looking for trouble in this heat, you don't run tires at 85. A blowout on this stretch would really be it. I suppose they took what I said as a kind of rebuke, but I didn't have that in mind. I'm no more comfortable than they are in this heat, but there's no point in dwelling on it. All day, while I've been thinking and talking about Phaedrus, they must have been thinking about how bad all this is. That's what's really wearing them down. The thought. Some things can be said about Phaedrus as an individual. He was a knower of logic, the classical system of the system which describes the rules and procedures of systematic thought, by which analytic knowledge may be structured and interrelated. He was so swift at this, his Stanford Binet IQ, which is essentially a record of skill at analytic manipulation, was recorded at 170, a figure that occurs in only one person in 50,000. He was systematic, but to say he thought and acted like a machine would be to misunderstand the nature of his thought. It was not like pistons and wheels and gears all moving at once, massive and coordinated. The image of a laser beam comes to mind instead. A single pencil of light of such terrific energy and such extreme concentration, it can be shot at the moon, and its reflection seen back on Earth. Phaedrus did not try to use his brilliance for general illumination. He sought one specific distant target and aimed for it and hit it. And that was all. General illumination of that target he hit now seems to be left for me. In proportion to his intelligence, he was extremely isolated. There's no record of his having had close friends. He traveled alone, always. Even in the presence of others, he was completely alone. People sometimes felt this and felt rejected by it, and so did not like him. But their dislike was not important to him. His wife and family seem to have suffered the most. His wife says those who tried to go beyond the barriers of his reserve found themselves facing a blank. My impression is that they were starved for some kind of affection, which he never gave. No one really knew him. That is evidently the way he wanted it, and that's the way it was. Perhaps his aloneness was the result of his intelligence. Perhaps it was the cause. But the two were always together, an uncanny, solitary intelligence. This still doesn't do it, though, because this and the image of a laser beam convey the idea that he was completely cold and unemotional, and that is not so. In his pursuit of what I have called the ghost of rationality, he was a fanatic hunter. One fragment becomes especially vivid now of a scene in the mountains where the sun was behind the mountain half an hour, and an early twilight had changed the trees and even the rocks to almost blackened shades of blue and gray and brown. Phaedrus had been there 3 days without food. His food had run out, but he was thinking deeply and seeing things, and was reluctant to leave. He was not far away from where he knew there was a road, and was in no hurry. In the dusk, coming down the trail, he saw movement, and then what seemed to be a dog approaching on the trail, a very large sheepdog, or an animal more like a husky, and he wondered what would bring a dog to this obscure place at this time of evening. He disliked dogs, but this animal moved in a way that forestalled these feelings. It seemed to be watching him, judging him. Phaedrus stared into the animal's eyes for a long time, and for a moment felt some kind of recognition. Then the dog disappeared. He realized much later it was a timber wolf, and the memory of this incident stayed with him a long time. I think it stayed with him because he had seen a kind of image of himself. A photograph can show a physical image in which time is static, and a mirror can show a physical image in which time is dynamic. But I think what he saw on the mountain was another kind of image altogether, which was not physical and did not exist in time at all. It was an image, nevertheless, and that is why he felt recognition. It comes to me vividly now because I saw it again last night as the visage of Phaedrus himself. Like that timber wolf on the mountain, he had a kind of animal courage. He went his own way with unconcern for consequences that sometimes stunned people, and stuns me now to hear about it. He did not often swerve to right or to left. I've discovered that. But this courage didn't arise from any idealistic idea of self-sacrifice, only from the intensity of his pursuit, and there was nothing noble about it. I think his pursuit of the ghost of rationality occurred because he wanted to wreak revenge on it, because he felt he himself was so shaped by it. He wanted to free himself from his own image. He wanted to destroy it because the ghost was what he was, and he wanted to be free from the bondage of his own identity. In a strange way, this freedom was achieved. This account of him must sound unworldly, but the most unworldly part of it is all yet to come. This is my own relationship to him. This has been forestalled and obscured until now, but nevertheless must be known. I first discovered him by inference from a strange series of events many years ago. One Friday I had gone to work and gotten quite a lot done before the weekend and was happy about that, and later that day drove to a party where, after talking to everybody too long and too loudly and drinking way too much, went into a back room to lie down for a while. When I awoke, I saw that I'd slept the whole night, because now it was daylight, and I thought, my God, I didn't even know the name of the hosts, and wondered what kind of embarrassment this was going to lead to. The room didn't look like the room I'd lain down in, but it had been dark when I came in, and I must have been blind drunk anyway. I got up and saw that my clothes were changed. These were not the clothes I had worn the night before. I walked out the door, but to my surprise the doorway led not to rooms of a house, but into a long corridor. As I walked down the corridor, I got the impression that everyone was looking at me. 3 different times a stranger stopped me and asked how I felt. Thinking they were referring to my drunken condition, I replied that I didn't even have a hangover, which caused one of them to start to laugh, but then catch himself. At a room at the end of the corridor, I saw a table where there was activity of some sort going on. I sat down nearby, hoping to remain unnoticed until I got all this figured out. But a woman dressed in white came up to me and asked if I knew her name. I read the little name clip on her blouse. She didn't see that I was doing this and seemed amazed and walked off in a hurry. When she came back, there was a man with her, and he was looking right at me. He sat down next to me and asked me if I knew his name. I told him what it was, and was as surprised as they were that I knew it. "It's very early for this to be happening," he said. "This looks like a hospital," I said. They agreed. "How did I get here?" I asked, thinking about the drunken party. The man said nothing, and the woman looked down. Very little was explained. It took me more than a week to deduce from the evidence around me that everything before my waking up was a dream, and everything afterward was reality. There was no basis for distinguishing the two, other than the growing pile of new events that seemed to argue against the drunk experience. Little things appeared, like the locked door, the outside of which I could never remember seeing, and a slip of paper from the probate court telling me that some person was committed as insane. Did they mean me? It was explained to me finally that you have a new personality now. But this statement was no explanation at all. It puzzled me more than ever, since I had no awareness at all of any old personality. If they had said, "You are a new personality," it would have been much clearer. That would have fitted. They had made the mistake of thinking of a personality as some sort of possession, like a suit of clothes which a person wears. But apart from a personality, what is there? Some bones and flesh, a collection of legal statistics perhaps, but surely no person. The bones and flesh and legal statistics are the garments worn by the personality, not the other way around. But who was the old personality whom they had known and presumed I was a continuation of? This was my first inkling of the existence of Phaedrus many years ago. In the days and weeks and years that have followed, I've learned much more. He was dead, destroyed by order of the court, enforced by the transmission of high-voltage alternating current through the lobes of his brain. Approximately 800 mils of amperage at durations of 0.5 to 1.5 seconds had been applied on 28 consecutive occasions in a process known technologically as annihilation ECS. A whole personality had been liquidated without a trace in a technologically faultless act that has defined our relationship ever since. I have never met him, never will. And yet strange wisps of his memory suddenly match and fit this road and desert bluffs and white-hot sand all around us, and there is a bizarre concurrence, and then I know he has seen all of this. He was here, otherwise I would not know it. He had to be. And in these sudden coalescences of vision, and in recall of some strange fragment of thought whose origin I have no idea of, I'm not a clairvoyant, a spirit medium receiving messages from another world. That is how it is. I see things with my own eyes, and I see things with his eyes too. He once owned them. These eyes. That is the terror of it. These gloved hands I now look at, steering the motorcycle down the road, were once his. And if you can understand the feeling that comes from that, then you can understand real fear. The fear that comes from knowing there is nowhere you can possibly run. We enter a low-rimmed canyon. Before long, a roadside stop I've been waiting for appears. A few benches, a little building, and some tiny green trees with hoses running to their bases. John, so help me God, is at the exit on the other side, ready to pull out onto the highway. I ignore this and pull up by the building. Chris jumps off, and we pull the machine back up on the stand. The heat rises from the engine as if it were on fire, throwing off waves that distort everything around it. Out of the corner of my eye, I see the other cycle come back. When they arrive, they are both glaring at me. Sylvia says, "We're just angry." I shrug my shoulders and walk to the drinking fountain. John says, "Where's all that stamina you were telling us about?" I look at him for a second and see he really is angry. "I was afraid you took that too seriously," I say, and then turn away. I drink the water, and it's alkaline, like soapy water. I drink it anyway. John goes into the building to soak his shirt with water. I check the oil level. The oil filter cap is so hot it burns my fingers right through the gloves. The engine hasn't lost much oil. The back tire tread is down a little more, but still serviceable. The chain is tight enough, but a little dry, so I oil it again to be safe. The critical bolts are all tight enough. John comes over, dripping with water, and says, "You go ahead this time. We'll stay behind." "I won't go fast," I say. "That's all right," he said. "We'll get there." So I go ahead, and we take it slowly. The road through the canyon doesn't straighten out into more of what we've been through, as I expected it would, but starts to wind upward. Surprise. Now the road meanders a little, now it cuts back away from the direction in which we should be going, then returns. Soon it rises a little, and then rises some more. We are moving in angular directions into narrow devil's gaps, then upward again, higher and a little higher each time. Some shrubs appear, then small trees. The road goes higher still into grass, and then fenced meadows. Overhead, a small cloud appears. Rain, perhaps? Perhaps. Meadows must have rain, and these now have flowers in them. Strange how all this has changed. Nothing to show it on the map, and the consciousness of memory has disappeared too. Phaedrus must not have come this way. But there was no other road. Strange. It keeps rising upward. The sun angles toward the cloud, which now has grown downward, to touch the horizon above us, in which there are trees, pines, and a cold wind comes down with pine smells from the trees. The flowers in the meadow blow in the wind, and the cycle leans a little, and we are suddenly cool. I look at Chris, and he is smiling. I am smiling too. Then the rain comes hard on the road with a gust of earth smell from the dust that has waited for too long, and the dust beside the road is pocked with the first raindrops. This is all so new, and we are so in need of it, a new rain. My clothes become wet, and goggles are spattered, and chills start and feel delicious. The cloud passes from beneath the sun, and the forest of pines and small meadows gleams again, sparkles where the sunlight catches small drops from the rain. We reach the top of the climb, dry again, but cool now, and stop, overlooking a huge valley and river below. "I think we have arrived," John says. Sylvia and Chris have walked into the meadow among the flowers under pines through which I can see the far side of the valley, away and below. I'm a pioneer now, looking onto a promised land. Part 2. Chapter 8. It's about 10 o'clock in the morning, and I'm sitting alongside the machine on a cool, shady curbstone back of a hotel we have found in Miles City, Montana. Sylvia is with Chris at a laundromat doing the laundry for all of us. John is off looking for a duckbill to put on his helmet. He thought he saw one at a cycle shop when we came into town yesterday. And I'm about to sharpen up the engine a little. Feeling good now. We got in here in the afternoon and made up for a lot of sleep. It was a good thing we stopped. We were so stupid with exhaustion, we didn't know how tired we were. When John tried to register rooms, he couldn't even remember my name. The desk girl asked us if we owned those groovy, dreamy motorcycles outside the window, and we both laughed so hard she wondered what she had said wrong. It was just numbskull laughter from too much fatigue. We'd have been more than glad to leave them parked and walk for a change. And baths. In a beautiful old enameled cast-iron bathtub that crouched on lion's claws in the middle of a marble floor, just waiting for us. The water was so soft it felt as if I would never get the soap off. Afterward, we walked up and down the main streets and felt like a family. On this machine, I've done the tuning so many times it's become a ritual. I don't have to think much about how to do it anymore. Just mainly look for anything unusual. The engine has picked up a noise that sounds like a loose tappet, but could be something worse, so I'm going to tune it now and see if it goes away. Tappet adjustment has to be done with the engine cold, which means wherever you park it for the night is where you work on it the next morning. Which is why I'm on a shady curbstone back of a hotel in Miles City, Montana. Right now, the air is cool in the shade, and will be for an hour or so until the sun gets around the tree branches, which is good for working on cycles. It's important not to tune these machines in the direct sun or late in the day when your brain gets muddy, because even if you've been through it 100 times, you should be alert and looking for things. Not everyone understands what a completely rational process this is, this maintenance of a motorcycle. They think it's some kind of a knack or some kind of affinity for machines in operation. They are right, but the knack is almost purely a process of reason, and most of the troubles are caused by what old-time radio men called a short between the earphones, failures to use the head properly. A motorcycle functions entirely in accordance with the laws of reason, and a study of the art of motorcycle maintenance is really a miniature study of the art of rationality itself. I said yesterday that the ghost of rationality was what Phaedrus pursued and what led to his insanity. But to get into that, it's vital to stay with down-to-earth examples of rationality so as not to get lost in generalities no one else can understand. Talk about rationality can get very confusing unless the things with which rationality deals are also included. We are at the classic romantic barrier now, where on one side we see a cycle as it appears immediately, and this is an important way of seeing it, and where on the other side we can begin to see it as a mechanic does, in terms of underlying form, and this is an important way of seeing things too. These tools, for example, this wrench, has a certain romantic beauty to it, but its purpose is always purely classical. It's designed to change the underlying form of the machine. The porcelain inside this first plug is very dark. That is classically as well as romantically ugly because it means the cylinder is getting too much gas and not enough air. The carbon molecules in the gasoline aren't finding enough oxygen to combine with, and they're just sitting here loading up the plug. Coming into town yesterday, the idol was loping a little, which is a symptom of the same thing. Just to see if it's just the one cylinder that's rich, I check the other one. They're both the same. I get out a pocket knife, grab a stick lying in the gutter, and whittle down the end to clean out the plugs, wondering what could be the cause of the richness. That wouldn't have anything to do with rods or valves, and carbs rarely go out of adjustment. The main jets are oversized, which causes richness at high speeds, but the plugs were a lot cleaner than before this, with the same jets. Mystery. You're always surrounded by them, but if you tried to solve them all, you'd never get the machine fixed. There's no immediate answer, so I just leave it as a hanging question. The first tappet is right on. No adjustment required, so I move on to the next. Still plenty of time before the sun gets past those trees. I always feel like I'm in church when I do this. The gauge is some kind of religious icon, and I'm performing a holy rite with it. It is a member of a set called precision measuring instruments, which in a classic sense has a profound meaning. In a motorcycle, this precision isn't maintained for any romantic or perfectionist reasons. It's simply that the enormous forces of heat and explosive pressure inside this engine can only be controlled through the kind of precision these instruments give. When each explosion takes place, it drives a connecting rod onto the crankshaft with a surface pressure of many tons per square inch. If the fit of the rod to the crankshaft is precise, the explosion force will be transferred smoothly, and the metal will be able to stand it. But if the fit is loose, by a distance of only a few thousandths of an inch, the force will be delivered suddenly, like a hammer blow, and the rod, bearing, and crankshaft surface will soon be pounded flat, creating a noise which at first sounds a lot like loose tappets. That's the reason I'm checking it now. If it is a loose rod, and I try to make it to the mountains without an overhaul, it will soon get louder and louder until the rod tears itself free, slams into the spinning crankshaft, and destroys the engine. Sometimes broken rods will pile right down through the crankcase and dump all the oil onto the road. All you can do then is start walking. But all this can be prevented by a few thousandths of an inch fit, which precision measuring instruments give, and this is their classical beauty. Not what you see, but what they mean, what they are capable of in terms of control of underlying form. The second tappet's fine. I swing over to the street side of the machine and start on the other cylinder. Precision instruments are designed to achieve an idea, dimensional precision, whose perfection is impossible. There is no perfectly shaped part of the motorcycle, and never will be. But when you come as close as these instruments take you, remarkable things happen, and you go flying across the countryside under a power that would be called magic if it were not so completely rational in every way. It's the understanding of this rational intellectual idea that's fundamental. John looks at the motorcycle and sees steel in various shapes and has negative feelings about these steel shapes and turns off the whole thing. I look at the shapes of steel now, and I see ideas. He thinks I'm working on parts. I'm working on concepts. I was talking about these concepts yesterday when I said that a motorcycle can be divided according to its components and according to its functions. When I said that, suddenly I created a set of boxes with the following arrangement. Motorcycle as a sum of components and functions. And when I said the components may be subdivided into a power assembly and a running assembly, suddenly appear some more little boxes. Components as a sum of power assembly and running assembly, motorcycle as a sum of components and functions. And you see that every time I made a further division, up came more boxes based on these divisions until I had a huge pyramid of boxes. Finally, you see that while I was splitting the cycle up into finer and finer pieces, I was also building a structure. This structure of concepts is formally called a hierarchy, and since ancient times has been a basic structure for all Western knowledge. Kingdoms, empires, churches, armies have all been structured into hierarchies. Modern businesses are so structured. Tables of contents of reference material are so structured. Mechanical assemblies, computer software, all scientific and technical knowledge is so structured. So much so that in some fields, such as biology, the hierarchy of kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species is almost an icon. The box motorcycle contains the box's components and functions. The box components contains the box's power assembly and running assembly, and so on. There are many other kinds of structures produced by other operators, such as causes, which produce long chain structures of the form A causes B, which causes C, which causes D, and so on. A functional description of the motorcycle uses this structure. The operators exists, equals, and implies produce still other structures. These structures are normally interrelated in patterns in paths so complex and so enormous, no one person can understand more than a small part of them in his lifetime. The overall name of these interrelated structures, the genus of which the hierarchy of containment and structure of causation are just species, is system. The motorcycle is a system, a real system. To speak of certain government and establishment institutions as the system is to speak correctly, since these organizations are founded upon the same structural conceptual relationships as a motorcycle. They are sustained by structural relationships even when they have lost all other meaning and purpose. People arrive at a factory and perform a totally meaningless task from 8 to 5 without question because the structure demands that it be that way. There's no villain, no mean guy who wants them to live meaningless lives. It's just that the structure, the system, demands it, and no one is willing to take on the formidable task of changing the structure just because it is meaningless. But to tear down a factory, or to revolt against a government, or to avoid repair of a motorcycle because it is a system, is to attack effects rather than causes. And as long as the attack is upon effects only, no change is possible. The true system, the real system, is our present construction of systematic thought itself, rationality itself. And if a factory is torn down, but the rationality which produced it is left standing, then that rationality will simply produce another factory. If a revolution destroys a systematic government, but the systematic patterns of thought that produce that government are left intact, then those patterns will repeat themselves in the succeeding government. There's so much talk about the system, and so little understanding. That's all the motorcycle is, a system of concepts worked out in steel. There's no part in it, no shape in it, that is not out of someone's mind. Number 3 tappet is right on too, one more to go. This had better be it. I've noticed that people who have never worked with steel have trouble seeing this, that the motorcycle is primarily a mental phenomenon. They associate metal with given shapes, pipes, rods, girders, tools, parts, all of them fixed and inviolable, and think of it as primarily physical. But a person who does machining or foundry work or forge work or welding sees steel as having no shape at all. Steel can be any shape you want if you are skilled enough, and any shape but the one you want if you are not. Shapes, like this tappet, are what you arrive at, what you give to the steel. Steel has no more shape than this old pile of dirt on the engine here. These shapes are all out of someone's mind. That's important to see. The steel? Hell, even the steel is out of someone's mind. There's no steel in nature. Anyone from the Bronze Age could have told you that. All nature has is a potential for steel. There's nothing else there. But what's potential? That's also in someone's mind. Ghosts. That's really what Phaedrus was talking about when he said it's all in the mind. It sounds insane when you just jump up and say it without reference to anything specific like an engine. But when you tie it down to something specific and concrete, the insane sound tends to disappear, and you see he could have been saying something of importance. The fourth tappet is too loose, which is what I had hoped. I adjust it. I check the timing and see that it is still right on, and the points are not pitted, so I leave them alone, screw on the valve covers, replace the plugs, and start it up. The tappet noise is gone, but that doesn't mean much yet while the oil is still cold. I let it idle while I pack the tools away, then climb on and head for a cycle shop a cyclist on the street told us about last night, where they may have a chain adjuster link and a new foot peg rubber. Chris must have nervous feet. His foot pegs keep wearing out. I go a couple blocks and still no tappet noise. It's beginning to sound good. I think it's gone. I won't come to any conclusions until we've gone about 30 miles, though. But until then, and right now, the sun is bright, the air is cool, my head is clear, there's a whole day ahead of us, we're almost to the mountains. It's a good day to be alive. It's this thinner air that does it. You always feel like this when you start getting into higher altitudes. The altitude. That's why the engine's running rich. Sure, that's got to be the reason. We're at 2,500 feet now. I'd better switch to standard jets. They take only a few minutes to put in. And lean out the idle adjustment a little. We'll be getting up a lot higher than this. Under some shady trees, I find Bill's cycle shop, but no Bill. A passerby says he has maybe gone fishing somewhere, leaving his shop wide open. We really are in the West. No one will leave a shop like this open in Chicago or New York. Inside, I see that Bill is a mechanic of the photographic mind school. Everything lying around everywhere. Wrenches, screwdrivers, old parts, old motorcycles, new parts, new motorcycles, sales literature, inner tubes, all scattered so thickly and clutteredly you can't even see the workbenches under them. I couldn't work in conditions like this, but that's just because I'm not a photographic mind mechanic. Bill can probably turn around and put his hand on any tool in this mess without having to think about where it is. I've seen mechanics like that. Drive you crazy to watch them, but they get the job done just as well and sometimes faster. Move one tool 3 inches to the left, though, and you'll have to spend days looking for it. Bill arrives with a grin about something. Sure, he's got some jets for my machine and knows right where they are. I'll have to wait a second, though. He's got to close a deal out and back on some Harley parts. I go with him out in a shed and back and see he is selling a whole Harley machine and used parts, except for the frame, which the customer already has. He is selling them all for $125. Not a bad price at all. Coming back, I comment, "He'll know something about motorcycles before he gets those together." Bill laughs. And that's the best way to learn, too. He has the jets and foot peg rubber, but no chain adjuster link. I get the rubber and jets installed, take the lump out of the idle, and ride back to the hotel. Sylvia and John and Chris are just coming down the stairs with their stuff as I arrive. Their faces indicate they're in the same good mood I'm in. We head down the main street, find a restaurant, and order steaks for lunch. "This is a great town," John says. "Really great. Surprised there were any like this left. I was looking all over this morning. They've got Stockman's bars, high-top boots, silver dollar belt buckles, Levi's, Stetsons, the whole thing. And it's real. It isn't just Chamber of Commerce stuff. In the bar down the block this morning, they just started talking to me like I'd lived here all my life." We order a round of beers. I see by a horseshoe sign on the wall we're in Olympia beer territory now, and order that. "They must have thought I was off a ranch or something," John continues. "And this one old guy was talking away about how he wasn't going to give a thing to the goddamn boys, and I really enjoyed that. The ranch was going to go to the girls because the goddamn boys spend every cent they got down at Susie's." John breaks up with laughter. "Sorry he ever raised 'em," and so on. I thought all that stuff disappeared 30 years ago, but it's still here. The waitress comes with the steaks, and we knife right into them. That work on the cycle has given me an appetite. "Something else that ought to interest you," John says. "They were talking in the bar about Bozeman, where we're going. They said the governor of Montana had a list of 50 radical college professors at the college in Bozeman he was going to fire. Then he got killed in a plane crash." "That was a long time ago," I answer. "These steaks really are good." "I didn't know they had a lot of radicals in this state." "They've got all kinds of people in this state," I say. "But that was just right-wing politics." John helps himself to some more salt. He says, "A Washington newspaper columnist came through and put it in his column yesterday, and that's why they were all talking about it. The president of the college confirmed it." "Did they print the list?" "I don't know. Do you know any of them?" "If they had 50 names," I say, "mine must have been one." They both look at me with some surprise. I don't know much about it, actually. It was him, of course, and with some feeling of falseness because of this, I explain that a radical in Gallatin County, Montana, is a little different from a radical somewhere else. This was a college, I tell them, where the wife of the President of the United States was actually banned because she was too controversial. "Who?" "Eleanor Roosevelt." "Oh my God," John laughs. "That must have been wild." They want to hear more, but it's hard to say anything. Then I remember one thing. In a situation like that, a real radical's actually got a perfect setup. He can do almost anything and get away with it because his opposition have already made asses out of themselves. They'll make him look good no matter what he says. On the way out, we pass a city park, which I noticed last night, and which produced a memory concurrence. Just a vision of looking up into some trees. He had slept on that park bench one night on his way through to Bozeman. That's why I didn't recognize that forest yesterday. He'd come through at night, on his way to the college at Bozeman. Chapter 9. Now we follow the Yellowstone Valley right across Montana. It changes from western sagebrush to midwestern cornfields and back again, depending on whether it's under irrigation from the river. Sometimes we cross over bluffs that take us out of the irrigated area, but usually we stay close to the river. We pass by a marker saying something about Lewis and Clark. One of them came up this way on a side excursion from the Northwest Passage. Nice sound. Fits the Chautauqua. We're really on a kind of Northwest Passage, too. We pass through more fields and desert, and the day wears on. I want to pursue further now that same ghost that Phaedrus pursued, rationality itself, that dull, complex, classical ghost of underlying form. This morning I talked about hierarchies of thought, the system. Now I want to talk about methods of finding one's way through these hierarchies. Logic. Two kinds of logic are used, inductive and deductive. Inductive inferences start with observations of the machine and arrive at general conclusions.
This book is continued on Disc 4.